This is going to be a quick few notes about railroads in terms of the reasons for the development of the railroads in Canada and the United States, and the consequences of the development of the railroads in those countries. So we're comparing railroads, right? And we're talking about reasons for and consequences of. Okay, so really let's talk about geography. In the Midwest, in both Canada and the United States, we don't have a lot of people living there. Unlike in the East, railroads develop and connect cities and already settled communities. In Canada, they're running this railroad across virtually uninhabitable land. And in the United States, they're running this railroad from one coast to the other, from the east to the west, the transcontinental railroad, through land that's not really settled much at the time. A little bit here and there, but not nearly as much as what's about to happen once the railroads come to town. Well, and make the town, right? So, in terms of geography, the Midwest is settled after the railroad development. So, is this a reason for or a consequence of? I'm going to say it's a consequence of, right? So, there's more to it than that. Why do they choose railroads? Why do they choose railroads? Well, sticking with geography, canals are doing great. The Erie Canal is perfect in the United States and the East, but really, when the canals freeze, the farther north you go, you're pretty much shut down until it thaws. So, plus you have varying water levels, which becomes difficult, and it's really labor intensive to dig canals, especially in the West, whether Canada or the United States, where you start to lose rivers, period, to connect. So, Canada is frozen, right? Railroads can travel across frozen ground. So, canals are, limit your route options. And your in terms of time of year and location, right? I'm going to fix that. Yearly use and location, right? So we don't want to be limited in terms of location. We want to be able to use this stuff year-round, and we want to be able to build it where we need it. Now, of course, mountains are going to be a problem, but there's plenty of passes to work through the Rocky Mountains for railroads. That brings us to a couple other things. Land. This is also geography, but I'm going to kind of switch up the color here because it's political. Okay? So we have this big thing, reasons for, let's see, the Civil War, right? Civil War and industry. So in the Civil War, there's lots of industry happening, especially ammunition, steel production, textiles, uniforms, timber, transportation. They're using the railroads. People are seeing the importance of the railroads to move troops and move supplies. There's new jobs. There's mobilization. This is like your first industrial war, first really modern war for a number of reasons. But it also allows the Pacific Railway Act of 1862. So 1862 is actually a pretty important year for both the U.S. And Canada, because laws are passed to build the Grand Trunk Railway in Canada and the Union Pacific in the United States. That's kind of a big deal. So with the laws that lead to, or the acts that lead to railroad construction, we also have land grants. The land grants, the government's giving cheap land to the railway, and then the railways and the government at the time, along with the Homestead Act, they're giving away land. Well, not giving it away, but they're selling it pretty cheaply because they want, they want the lands to be settled, right? So they're selling cheap land, the railways, because they're buying this land, but they just need part of it, right? They just need to drive their railroad through the land. So basically, they're selling the parts of the land that they're not going to use. Eventually, that's going to turn into communities and strategic areas, usually near where roads are coming together, where there's fresh water sources, and where it makes sense for railroad junctions. The city of Atlanta is built on railroad junctions, right? So there's a couple things right there. Now let's just move on to one more point to make here, and that's about demography. So who built the railroads? It's kind of a good question. Who built the railroads? So we're talking about Chinese workers. Some of them came to work in the mines in California, the gold mines, and in Colorado on the Rocky Mountains. But we're also talking about the fact that they went on to build the railroads when the mining kind of dried up, or it just wasn't as lucrative as they thought. Now you also have Irish, right, and Scottish. Okay, around the world there's immigration happening, or sorry, emigration from countries, and immigration to the United States and Latin American countries and other countries around the world. So some countries are losing people because they're just at their capacity and they're all done, and other countries are gaining people because they have jobs, like building the railroads. Okay, people were moving out of Canada until the railroads started to be built and kind of stimulated their economy. I'll go back. I kind of jumped around a little bit. I'll go back to the Grand Trunk Railroad. That actually takes Canadian goods from like the middle of Canada through east, south to the port at, Portland, Maine, where the port never freezes. Okay, so the Grand Trunk Railroad, one of the most important parts of that is it's taking goods from the middle of Canada east into a seaport in the Atlantic that doesn't freeze. All of this, consequences of, means jobs, it means immigration, it means economic growth, it means the closing of the frontiers in the Midwest, right? It means settlement of communities, it means movement of people around different areas, it means industrial growth in the areas of steel, in the areas of, because transportation is such a driver in the economy, it means that other goods can be made more cheaply. And like I said, we have more markets. We have more markets and access to markets in the Pacific. We have more markets because people are settling, people are moving around. With the land, the Homestead Act, plus the land that the railroads are selling off cheaply, now you have more opportunity for people who didn't have as much opportunity in the past. This is like, this is when the land of milk and honey, or the land of opportunity, really starts to grow. It wasn't all great though, and that's where we're going to pick